One conquered kingdom, one locked door. That's the conversion rate of empire in 30 BCE, not gold into glory, a human body into a public receipt. Alexandria has fallen, and Octavian doesn't need Cleopatra's death to prove he won. He needs her alive long enough to prove something dirtier, that Rome didn't tear itself apart for power. It saved itself from a foreign queen. So here's the big question that will govern this story. When an empire wins the war but still needs your humiliation, what is it actually conquering? Your territory, your will, or reality itself? Start where the romantic version refuses to start, with logistics. Cleopatra VII isn't a legend in a painting. She's a political object under guard, and Rome is fighting a second war after the battle. The war over what her body will mean in Roman streets. A dead queen can't be marched. A dead queen can't be displayed. A dead queen can't cleanse a civil war into a foreign victory. That is why the victor's first instinct is not execution, it's containment. Plutarch tells us Cleopatra barricaded herself inside a monument near the temple of Isis, with treasure and 2 loyal attendants. People call it a tomb, but functionally it's a fortress. Massive doors, stone walls, a place designed for one purpose: to control the terms of surrender. She's not hiding because she's weak. She's hiding because she understands Rome's ritual math. A captured ruler is not simply defeated. They are processed, paraded in a triumph, turned into a warning, reduced to a symbol that makes the crowd feel clean. Then the trigger. Mark Antony receives a false report that Cleopatra is already dead. He doesn't fall in battle. He collapses under narrative, under the kind of misinformation that turns politics into panic. He falls on his sword. His men drag him bleeding to the base of Cleopatra's monument and beg her to open the doors. She refuses. Not because she doesn't care, because she can count. Open the doors, and Octavian's men pour in. Keep them shut, and she keeps the last currency she has, the ability to choose what happens next. So Cleopatra and her attendants do something obscene and intimate at the same time. They lower ropes through an upper opening and haul Antony upward while he bleeds. A siege operation inside a love story. Antony dies inside, in Cleopatra's arms, while Rome closes in outside the walls. Now, watch Octavian's restraint, because it isn't mercy. He doesn't smash the doors to drag her out. He sends Proculius to speak, to distract, to keep her attention fixed on negotiation while men climb and slip inside. Cleopatra realizes what is happening too late. She reaches for death, tries to stab herself, and is stopped. Plutarch's point is surgical. Rome gives her a guard whose job is not to punish, but to prevent suicide. Her body is no longer hers. It is a state asset. Cleopatra thinks death is dignity. Octavian thinks death is theft. And between those two beliefs sits the same locked room, quiet, stone, watched, where the next question becomes unavoidable. If Rome can't own her living humiliation, what will it manufacture in its place? Antony didn't lose his life to Octavian's sword first. He lost it to information. Manufactured, misheard, weaponized in the one place even a Roman warlord is soft. The part that still believes there is a private exit from public ruin. The ancient sources agree on the spine of the moment. Cleopatra had retreated into a monument near the temple of Isis with treasure and 2 women she trusted. That detail matters more than the love story. Treasure wasn't sentiment, it was leverage. A queen who can burn her own wealth can still negotiate with fire. Octavian knew it. Cleopatra knew he knew it. So she didn't take refuge in a bedroom. She took refuge in stone. Then came the message that snapped Antony's last restraint. Cleopatra is dead. Whether it was a deliberate ruse, a garbled report, or a lie racing faster than judgment, the effect is what counts. Antony doesn't pause to confirm. He doesn't send a man to look. He doesn't bargain with uncertainty. He reaches for the Roman solution to shame, the blade. Plutarch paints it as a collapse of a system that trained men to fear dishonor more than death. A defeated commander is supposed to die cleanly, to deny the victor the pleasure of spectacle. But the body rarely obeys the script. Antony falls on his sword and survives long enough to learn the report was false. That is the cruel hinge, not tragedy, but timing. A suicide attempt that fails becomes a slow execution you have to watch. His servants run. They lift him. They drag him, bleeding, toward the one place that might still hold meaning, Cleopatra's monument. Outside, this isn't a romantic reunion. It's siege logistics with a dying man as cargo. And Cleopatra will not open the doors. This is the part audiences always misread as coldness. It isn't. It's arithmetic. Open the doors and you don't let Antony in. You let Octavian in. You turn a controlled space into a capture point. Cleopatra understands what Rome does with living symbols. She has no illusions that mercy is an emotion. In Rome, mercy is a policy tool, given when it profits, removed when it doesn't. So the monument becomes a machine. From the upper opening, an aperture meant for air, light, maybe offerings, ropes are lowered. Antony is tied, looped, hauled upward by hands that should have been grieving instead of calculating angles and weight. Cleopatra and her attendants pull, strain, drag a body that is still alive, still heavy, still bleeding. His blood stains stone. His breath becomes part of the architecture. This is not a lover's tableau. It is a queen performing the last act of sovereignty she has left, control of the threshold. Inside the monument, Antony dies in Cleopatra's arms. Plutarch preserves a version of his final composure, words that try to rescue meaning from collapse. But the deeper point is uglier. He dies believing he can still choose his ending, while Cleopatra is watching that option shrink in real time. Because Antony can die and be finished, Cleopatra can die and become a public instrument. She has minutes, if that, before the war resumes in a new form. Octavian arrives, and here the story exposes Rome's real priority. He doesn't begin with a battering ram. He doesn't treat the monument as a fortress to be taken. He treats it as a vault with a priceless asset inside, an asset that could burn itself. If Octavian storms the doors, Cleopatra can still seize the narrative with a quick death. Worse, she could ignite the treasure, turning conquest into smoke, making Rome's victory look wasteful, incompetent, incomplete. The winner of a civil war cannot afford to look like a vandal. He needs Egypt not as ruins, but as revenue. Grain, gold, ports, an empire's supply chain. Alexandria isn't a trophy city. It's a plug-in to Rome's future. So Octavian does what states do when they want control, not chaos. he negotiates, at least in appearance. A messenger is sent, not with affection, not with apology, but with terms. Speak, surrender, think of the future, think of your children. The language is designed to sound like choice while narrowing the exits. Cleopatra listens through stone, calculating the same way she did at the door. Because she understands the trap on the other side of discussion. A Roman triumph. That is the real horror emerging now. Antony's death feels like the end of a love story. It isn't. It's the opening of a political ritual. Octavian's victory needs a performance in Rome, a public purification where the crowd can be taught what the war was really about. And Cleopatra, alive, is the perfect prop, which means the next 10 minutes matter more than the last 10 years. Cleopatra is still inside the monument, still sealed behind her own defenses, still the last author of her ending, if she can keep it. Octavian is outside, refusing to smash his way in because he wants her alive. And that raises the question that should make your skin go cold. If the conqueror won't break down the doors, what will he climb through instead? Octavian doesn't attack the monument the way a soldier would. He approaches it the way a politician approaches a witness. Careful, quiet, and already thinking about how the crowd will be told this later. A battering ram would be honest. It would admit fear. It would admit that Cleopatra still holds agency behind stone. Octavian can't afford that admission. Not after a civil war where legitimacy is the only currency that matters. So he chooses a method that looks like restraint and functions like control. He speaks first. Plutarch gives us the mechanics. A Roman named Proculeius is sent as the voice. The message is simple on the surface. Caesar wishes to discuss terms, but every word is engineered. Terms implies dignity. Future implies choice. Your children implies a moral hostage without ever saying the word. Cleopatra does what she has done since the doors were shut. She treats language as a battlefield. She refuses to open. She speaks through a narrow gap, stone to stone, negotiating like a ruler who still believes the right sentence can buy one more day of power. She demands guarantees, safety for her children, a promise that sounds like law. And while she is doing that, while she is forced to pin her attention to Proculeius's voice, Octavian's men are moving. This is the part that matters for understanding Rome, not because it is dramatic, but because it is typical. Empires don't only conquer with force, they conquer with procedures that make force feel unnecessary. Proculeius keeps her talking. The soldiers climb. The same upper opening that took Antony in now becomes an entry point for her capture. The monument stops being her fortress and becomes her trap. It happens fast. Cleopatra realizes it when it's too late. Hands where there shouldn't be hands. Boots scraping stone inside the sacred space she thought she controlled. Her reaction is immediate and brutally rational. She reaches for death. Not later, not after speeches, now. That detail is not a flourish. It is the point. The moment Rome gets physical access to her, the only remaining weapon she trusts is her own ending. She produces a blade. How she had it, where it was hidden, the sources don't care to itemize. The meaning is enough. She tries to stab herself, to pull the emergency brake before the train reaches Rome. and she is stopped. Proculeius's men seize her. They wrestle the weapon away. They don't strike her down in anger. They don't punish her. They do the opposite. They preserve her. Because in Octavian's calculus, Cleopatra's death isn't a relief. It's a loss of property. Here the moral geometry flips. The defeated woman wants to die because death is the last border Rome can't cross. The victor wants her alive because life is the last border she can't defend. A dead Cleopatra is a private ending. A living Cleopatra is a public instrument. So Octavian's orders are not harm her. They are worse. Do not let her escape by dying. This is where the story stops being about romance entirely and becomes about statecraft. Legal, ritual, logistical. Triumph isn't just a parade. It's a constitutional performance. A visible proof of domination, staged for the crowd, translated into legitimacy for the victor. If the crowd sees Cleopatra alive, diminished and controlled, then Octavian can sell the war as something other than Romans slaughtering Romans. He can launder a power grab into a purification ritual. He can point to the foreign queen and say, that was the enemy. That was the corruption. That was why we bled. And notice what that implies. Cleopatra is not being held because she is dangerous. She is being held because she is useful. Plutarch reports that Octavian appoints a guard whose job is explicit: keep her from killing herself. Later tradition names this man Epaphroditus. The name matters less than the function. The function is chillingly modern, a controlled custody designed not to extract information, but to preserve an asset for a public event. Cleopatra's body becomes an exhibit scheduled for a future date. That's why the immediate aftermath is not celebration. It's security. They remove her from the monument. They bring her back under surveillance. They monitor access. They narrow the world around her to a room, a door, a schedule. This is not a dungeon in the medieval sense. It's more efficient than that. It's a system built on one principle: time belongs to Rome now. Cleopatra's mind is still her own, but her environment is no longer negotiable. She can't choose when she eats, who she sees, what she touches, what messages reach her. Those are levers. And levers are how states move human beings without needing chains visible to the public. And this is where Octavian's cruelty sharpens into something more intelligent than brutality. Killing her would be simple. Holding her is harder. Holding her without making her a martyr is harder still. And holding her while preparing a story Rome can repeat for centuries, that is the real objective. Because Cleopatra doesn't just threaten Octavian with escape, she threatens him with silence, with the one act that refuses participation. If she dies on her own terms, she denies him the cleanest spectacle the Roman world can produce, the living enemy reduced to a warning. So, Octavian has to solve a problem that no sword can solve. He has to make Cleopatra stay alive against her will. And he only has one reliable tool for that kind of coercion, something sharper than blades, quieter than chains, and more persuasive than promises. He has leverage. And the closest leverage is not gold, not armies, not even her ruined kingdom. It's her children. If you want to understand why Octavian feared Cleopatra's suicide, don't start with snakes. Start with choreography. Rome did not celebrate victory with silence. It celebrated with a legal ritual machine called the triumph. Part parade, part sermon, part public proof that the state still deserved obedience. The streets became a courtroom without judges. The crowd became a jury without deliberation. And the defeated enemy, king, general, queen, became an exhibit. Not simply to punish them, but to teach Rome what to believe about the war that had just ended. That is why Cleopatra's body mattered. It wasn't just a person, it was a sentence. The tradition is blunt. Captives are displayed, often in chains, marched through the city, surrounded by spoils, banners, and the victor's men. At the end of the performance, some high-status prisoners were executed, sometimes after being confined. The details varied across centuries, but the logic stayed stable. Humiliation first, death second. Because death without humiliation is incomplete. It doesn't instruct the crowd. It doesn't convert violence into moral superiority. So Cleopatra's nightmare is not melodrama, it is literacy. She understands Roman ritual. Plutarch records a key line. Cleopatra did not want to be led in triumph. That phrase is colder than any love scene. It means she knows the state has a template for her body, and she is trying to tear up the form before the ink dries. Because to be led in triumph is to be reduced, publicly, into a simplified meaning the crowd can consume. And Octavian's situation makes that meaning priceless. He has just won a civil war. Romans killed Romans for years. Families split. Senators chose sides. Legions mutinied. Cities were punished. The Republic's last organs were being removed in public. If Octavian walks back into Rome and says, "I killed my rivals and now I will rule," that is not victory. That is confession. So he needs a moral alibi. He needs the war to be remembered not as Romans murdering Romans, but as Rome defending itself from a foreign threat, a foreign queen, a dangerous East, a corrupting seductress, something that can carry the blame away from Roman hands, something the crowd can hate without recognizing their own complicity. Triumph provides the stage for that alibi. In a triumph, the enemy does not speak. The enemy does not debate policy. The enemy does not remind the audience that Rome invaded first. The enemy is silent, because silence is part of the ritual. The crowd doesn't need the enemy's truth. It needs the enemy's posture, lowered head, bound wrists, the visible proof that Rome's violence was necessary. That is why a dead Cleopatra is a problem. A corpse can be mourned. A corpse can become a martyr. A corpse can refuse to participate. A living Cleopatra in chains is a different kind of fact, one that looks like the state's version of reality. Now look at what this means psychologically. When a crowd watches a defeated enemy marched through its streets, the crowd is not just witnessing humiliation. It is being recruited. Every spectator becomes a small co-author of the narrative. We were right. We were threatened. We were saved. The humiliation does not only punish the captive, it absolves the public. It turns moral doubt into applause. That is why Octavian cannot allow Cleopatra to die quickly and privately in Alexandria. If she dies without being displayed, the war remains what it was, a Roman power struggle. But if Cleopatra is displayed, the war becomes a myth. Rome versus the East, civilization versus corruption, law versus witchcraft. The public doesn't just accept the result, they feel cleansed by it. And that is the sick genius of the ritual. Triumph transforms suffering into legitimacy. It turns the conquered body into a political instrument. It makes violence feel like order. So, when Octavian orders guards to prevent Cleopatra's suicide, he is not being sentimental. He is protecting a ritual supply chain. He is preserving a living component required for the final stage of his political manufacturing. This is also why Cleopatra's choice becomes so dangerous to him. Because suicide is not only escape, it is sabotage. It denies the state its exhibit. It breaks the choreography. It refuses the crowd its catharsis. It exposes that the empire's legitimacy depends on a person's cooperation, even if that cooperation is forced. In that sense, the suicide of a captive queen is not a private act. It is a political strike. Cleopatra knows it. Octavian knows it. That's why their conflict is not simply over life and death. It is over authorship. Who gets to write the ending? And the moment you see that, a darker question appears under the famous one. The question isn't, did she use an asp? The question is, what does an empire do when the captive refuses to play her role in the empire's ritual? Octavian's first answer was force, seize her, disarm her, guard her. But force alone cannot guarantee compliance, because he doesn't just need her alive. He needs her broken enough to be led. And that means the next stage is not chains. It's persuasion, delivered as blackmail. Because if triumph is a ritual for the crowd, then the lever that moves the captive has to be personal. Octavian has already reached for it. He has her children. Here's the contradiction. Octavian inherits the moment he wins Egypt. Cleopatra is not convenient. A convenient enemy is a barbarian king in fur, a pirate in chains, a nameless rebel whose defeat feels like hygiene. Cleopatra is the opposite. She is literate, diplomatic, a ruler who speaks in treaties, not screams. She has lived in Rome. She has sat in rooms where senators pretend to worship law while trading votes like currency. She has negotiated at the level of the state. And that is precisely why Octavian needs her reduced to something smaller, because a civil war is hard to sell. Romans don't like admitting they murder Romans for power. They prefer a story where bloodshed is a defensive necessity, where the state kills in self-protection, not ambition. That is the psychological function of foreign enemies. They make internal violence feel moral. Octavian understands this with the instincts of a man who is about to turn the Republic into a monarchy, without using the word king. So he needs a myth that can swallow the facts. He needs Antony, his Roman rival, to look less like a political opponent and more like a victim of contamination. Not a man who chose a side, but a man seduced, corrupted, Easternized. And for that, Cleopatra must be cast as a kind of virus, the exotic queen whose allure turned a Roman general into a traitor. This is propaganda at its most practical. It is not about persuading experts. It's about giving the crowd a moral shortcut, a single image they can carry home in their mouths. We didn't destroy ourselves. She did. But here is the problem. Cleopatra won't stay simple. Even ancient writers who dislike her can't erase her competence. She ruled a fragile dynasty in a brutal Mediterranean marketplace. She survived siblings, coups, and Roman interference long before Octavian arrived. She wasn't a random seductress who stumbled into history. She was a strategist trying to keep Egypt alive in a world where Rome treated kingdoms like future provinces. that makes her dangerous to Octavian's story. Because if the public sees her as a political actor, flawed, yes, but rational, then the war looks like what it was. A Roman struggle for supremacy that swallowed Egypt as collateral. And if the war looks like that, Octavian's victory looks less like salvation and more like conquest, less like lawful order and more like a takeover. So Octavian needs a transformation. He needs to take a complicated enemy and compress her into a symbol, something legible from the cheap seats of Rome. That is what triumph is for. It's visual argument. It turns nuance into posture. It replaces debate with spectacle. A living queen in defeat becomes a single sentence the crowd can read without thinking. And now you see why keeping her alive is not mercy. It's production. Cleopatra's body is the raw material from which Octavian will manufacture legitimacy. But raw material can still resist. It can still choose death. So he needs to do more than guard her. He needs to shape her choices. This is where the conquest turns from military to psychological. Octavian doesn't have to convince Cleopatra that he is kind. He only has to convince her that the costs of dying are higher than the costs of living. That is the whole mechanism of coercion. You don't need love, you need leverage. And Cleopatra has one vulnerability that even a queen can't armor against: her children. In the sources, Cleopatra's children are not just family. They are claims. Caesarion, her son by Julius Caesar, is an alternative future. A walking contradiction to Octavian's propaganda, because Octavian's authority rests on being Caesar's adopted heir. A biological son is a threat, not because the boy is powerful today, but because he can be powerful tomorrow. In Rome, legitimacy is a weapon, and Octavian cannot afford to leave a weapon lying around. The younger children, twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, are also political. They tie Cleopatra to Antony's dynastic dreams in the East. They are living reminders that Antony tried to build a counter-order to Rome's Senate-centered myth. Even if these children are harmless, they are symbolic, and symbols are what empires kill. So, Octavian does what the Roman state does best. He turns private bonds into public pressure. He separates. He isolates. He controls access. He makes information about their safety a currency that only Rome can spend. He doesn't need to torture Cleopatra's body to torture her decisions. He only needs to place her inside an impossible equation. Live, and maybe your children live. Die, and your children become unprotected, exposed to necessity. That is how an empire makes a captive police herself. It offers hope as a leash and calls it mercy. This is also why the famous debate about the ASP can become a distraction. Whether Cleopatra used poison or a snake, the core truth is that Rome was trying to take away her ability to choose the ending. That is what the guard outside the door represents: the state claiming ownership of a person's final act. And now, we reach the coldest part of Octavian's strategy: time. He doesn't just hold her, he holds her long enough for the myth to harden, long enough for the paperwork to settle, long enough for Rome to hear a story where Antony wasn't defeated by another Roman. He was defeated by the East, embodied in one woman. Which means the next phase is not the sword, it's custody as violence. A room, a schedule, controlled messages, controlled silence. an environment designed to make the captive's mind collapse into compliance. Because Octavian doesn't just need Cleopatra alive, he needs her alive in the right shape. He needs her ready to be led. And that requires a prison that doesn't just contain her body, but edits her will. A cell doesn't have to be underground to be a cage. Sometimes the most efficient prison is the one that looks administrative, quiet, clean, routine, because routine is how power convinces itself it is not being cruel. Plutarch's account makes the policy clear even when he doesn't linger on decor. Octavian appoints a guard to prevent Cleopatra from killing herself. Later tradition gives the name Epaphroditus. Whether you remember the name doesn't matter. Remember the job description. Her death is not permitted. That is the point where conquest becomes ownership. And notice the inversion. Rome, the empire of law, is now enforcing life as a sentence. Cleopatra is not being kept alive for her benefit. She's being kept alive to preserve a ritual supply chain that ends in Rome. An ending that requires her body to be present, visible, controllable. This is where the modern ear can be fooled. We imagine torture as pain delivered to nerves. But Rome is doing something colder. It is manufacturing a psychological environment in which every option collapses into what the state wants. Not by beating her daily, but by shrinking her world until the only meaningful information comes through Roman hands. Control begins with access. Who can see her? Who can speak to her? What messages reach her? What objects enter the room? Whether she can reach her attendants, whether she can reach her children, whether she can even know with certainty what is happening beyond the walls. That's the first violence, epistemic violence, the theft of reliable knowledge. When you can't verify anything, you become dependent on your captor's version of reality. That dependency is the beginning of surrender. Then comes the second violence, time. A swift execution is finite. A swift suicide is finite. A prolonged custody is elastic. It stretches fear into days, forces the captive to rehearse humiliation in her mind until imagination becomes a second jailer. Octavian doesn't need Cleopatra to suffer physically every hour. He needs her to live long enough for dread to do its work. And dread is a predictable machine. It feeds on uncertainty. It multiplies in isolation. It turns the future into a room you are forced to walk into, over and over, in your head. That is why Cleopatra's refusal to be led in triumph becomes so important. Triumph is not only death afterward. Triumph is the public stripping of self. For a ruler, humiliation is not a feeling. It is a political death before the physical one. It is your image, your authority, being cut down in front of the crowd. Rome understood that the fastest way to destroy a defeated enemy was not simply to kill them, but to teach the public to despise them first. So, Octavian's custody is designed to hold Cleopatra in the gap between two horrors. If she lives, she faces Rome's ritual degradation. If she dies, she risks condemning her children to necessity. This is why talk of mercy is obscene here. Mercy would mean choices that are truly available. What Cleopatra is offered is a menu where every item is poisoned. Now add the third violence, identity. Cleopatra's entire life has been negotiation, audience, ceremony, presence. Being seen is part of being a monarch. Octavian weaponizes that by making her unseen, or seen only under Roman terms. Her attendants are separated, her circle is broken, her court is dissolved. The queen becomes an individual trapped in silence. Even if no one lays a hand on her, this is an assault on selfhood. A ruler reduced to a patient, a ward, a detainee. Language changes, titles evaporate, decisions are made elsewhere. The empire's grandeur is built on the moral cost of shrinking people until they fit inside paperwork. And the paperwork is the point. Octavian is not only holding a woman, he is holding a political object while he rearranges the world around her. Egypt is being converted from kingdom to asset. Ports, storehouses, treasuries, systems that feed Rome are being secured. Grain shipments matter, revenue matters, stabilization matters. Cleopatra alive, contained, and compliant makes that conversion smoother. Cleopatra dead in a blaze of defiance risks chaos, sympathy, and a story Octavian doesn't control. So containment isn't passive, it's active governance. Every guard at the door is an argument. Rome decides what happens next. Every restricted message is a reminder. Rome decides what you know. Every day she remains alive is a day Octavian's narrative hardens without her consent. This is why the famous details, figs, asp, poison, can mislead. Those are methods. The core phenomenon is structural. Rome is trying to remove the last private territory a defeated enemy possesses, the right to author their own ending. But Octavian still has a problem. Guarding her can prevent suicide today, maybe tomorrow. It can't guarantee she will walk obediently into triumph. And triumph requires more than a living body. It requires a spirit that doesn't resist. So violently, it becomes a scandal. So, Octavian has to shift strategies, not from force to kindness, never that, but from force to a sharper tool. He needs to make Cleopatra police herself. He needs her to believe that survival, humiliation included, might buy something worth the cost. And there is only one currency strong enough to purchase that belief. Not gold, not titles, not promises of dignity. Her children. Because the moment a captive loves someone more than she loves her own freedom, the empire has found the lever that moves her without chains. And once that lever is in place, the next step is inevitable. Negotiation. Not as dialogue, but as a trap carefully built out of hope. The most sophisticated prison is the one that convinces you the bars are your own idea. Octavian doesn't need Cleopatra to admire him. He needs her to hesitate. He needs a pause long enough for survival to feel rational. Because Cleopatra's suicide isn't just an escape, it's sabotage. It steals the one object Octavian needs for his political theatre, a living queen reduced to a lesson. So he shifts from custody to leverage. In the ancient sources, the exact wording of messages is not preserved like a courtroom transcript. What is preserved is the logic. Octavian keeps her under guard, receives her letters, and responds in a way that keeps her alive and manageable. This is where modern scripts often invent day-by-day torture scenes. You don't need them. The actual mechanism is already brutal. Conditional hope. Cleopatra has children. And in Rome, children are never just children. They are claims. They are future arguments about legitimacy. They are the raw material of dynastic war. Caesarion, Cleopatra's son with Julius Caesar, is the most dangerous claim of all. Octavian's authority is built on adoption. He is Caesar's heir because Caesar wrote it so. But adoption, in politics is always vulnerable to biology. A living son can be used by anyone who wants to call Octavian a fraud. Caesarion doesn't need an army today. He only needs to exist tomorrow. That is why he is a threat. Cleopatra knows this. Octavian knows she knows this. And that shared knowledge become a noose. Now look at the psychological geometry Octavian constructs. He doesn't say, "I will murder your son." He doesn't need to. He allows the implication to breathe inside the room until Cleopatra supplies the rest. That is how coercion works when it wants to look like law. It makes you do the reasoning, so the violence feels like inevitability rather than a decision. The offer, explicit or implied, is simple. Cooperate, and your children might live. Refuse, and their future is uncertain. Uncertain is a polite Roman word. It can mean exile, it can mean captivity, it can mean death with paperwork. This is why negotiation becomes a weapon. It turns a captive's love into a liability. It creates a second self inside Cleopatra, the mother who wants survival and the monarch who wants dignity. Octavian doesn't have to defeat Cleopatra in one stroke. He only has to keep those two selves at war until she is too exhausted to choose cleanly. And he understands something most storytellers miss. Humiliation is easier to endure when it can be framed as sacrifice. If Cleopatra can tell herself, "I am living through this to save them," then Octavian has a path to triumph. Not because he has convinced her the parade is acceptable, but because he has given her a story that makes obedience feel like virtue. That is a master technique of power. It doesn't only punish, it recruits morality as a tool of compliance. But Cleopatra is not naive. She has governed in a world where promises are weapons. So, she tries to bargain the way rulers bargain, with terms, guarantees, written assurances, the safety of her children, the right to bury Antony, the right to keep a shred of royal identity. And Octavian gives just enough. This is the trap. He cannot give her certainty, because certainty would empower her. But he can give her managed ambiguity, the sensation that cooperation might alter outcomes. That sensation is stronger than chains. It makes the captive invest in the conqueror's game. It makes every day of survival feel like progress towards saving someone else. Meanwhile, Octavian's interests remain unchanged. He needs Cleopatra for the spectacle. He needs Caesarion removed for security. He needs Egypt absorbed for revenue. His incentives point in one direction, and Cleopatra's hope is the only thing that can keep her from seeing it clearly. So, he feeds the hope. Not with tenderness, never that, but with access. A controlled visit, a message allowed through, a small concession that makes the captive believe there is negotiation happening rather than management. Rome is expert at this because Rome is expert at ritual. A negotiation, in this context, is a ritual too, a performance of choice inside a system that has already decided. This is also where the law face of empire becomes a mask. Octavian can tell himself he is being reasonable. He can tell the record, later, in Rome, that he offered terms, that Cleopatra was treated with dignity, that her death was her own decision. That's how states avoid guilt. They build a paper trail of apparent options, so the victim's final act looks voluntary. But Cleopatra's problem is simpler and more brutal than legal language. She doesn't control information. She doesn't know what is happening to her children in real time. She doesn't know which promises are sincere and which are placeholders. She doesn't know if Caesarion has already been marked for death. And uncertainty, when it concerns your child, is a solvent. It dissolves even royal pride. So her mind runs the calculation again and again. If I die now, I deny Octavian the parade, but I may doom them. If I live, I may save them, but I become Rome's exhibit. This is what Octavian wants, not agreement, but paralysis. Because paralysis buys time, and time buys narrative. Every day Cleopatra remains alive under Roman custody. The image of Octavian as savior hardens. Every day he can prepare Rome to receive the story the way he wants it received. Yet, negotiation has a failure point. Conditional hope can keep someone alive, but it can also sharpen their suspicion. The longer the captive lives inside the trap, the more likely she is to see its geometry. And Cleopatra is not a random captive. She is a ruler trained in reading people who lie for a living, which means the weapon Octavian is using, hope, contains the seed of its own collapse. If she realizes the outcome is fixed, then hope turns to poison. The trap snaps shut, and the only escape left is the one Octavian has been preventing since the monument, a death that denies the triumph. So the question now is not whether Cleopatra wants to die. She does. The question is what will finally convince her that living cannot save anyone. Because the moment Cleopatra believes her children are doomed no matter what, the last leverage Octavian has evaporates. And then the empire faces the one outcome it cannot ritualize cleanly: a queen who refuses to participate, a body the state cannot parade, a story that has to be replaced with something else. By this point in the story, the most famous detail is also the least reliable: the snake. That should already tell you something about how power works. When the sources are uncertain, the version that survives is rarely the one that best fits biology. It's the one that best fits symbolism, the one that serves the needs of memory, ritual, and propaganda. Start with what the earliest and strongest witnesses actually give us. Strabo, writing close enough to the period to matter, reports two traditions. Cleopatra died either by the bite of an asp or by applying poison. He doesn't present one as proven. He presents them as competing explanations. That's not indecision. It's a warning label. It means that even in the generation that followed, people did not have a clean, verified account. They had a story, and the story already came in multiple editions. Cassius Dio later leans into uncertainty too. He describes the discovery of Cleopatra's body and notes small wounds, details that could be consistent with a bite or with something else. He reports possibilities: an asp brought in, a concealed method, an instrument. But again, the spine is not "we know exactly." The spine is "we cannot be sure." Plutarch, writing later still, but drawing on testimony and tradition, gives the most cinematic version: the basket, the figs, the quiet. And he does what careful ancient writers often do. He gives the story and admits the doubt. He knows people say it was an asp. He also knows poison is plausible. He knows the method is contested. That's the historical core. The method is uncertain in the sources. So why is the snake the version that conquers the next 2,000 years? Because the snake is legible. An Egyptian queen dying by a snake bite is not just an ending, it's a brand. It's a symbol that compresses an entire political conflict into a single image that can be carved, painted, repeated, and understood without context. The cobra, associated with Egyptian royal iconography, turns death into a national emblem. And to Roman audiences, a snake is also moral shorthand. Deceit, exotic danger, seductive poison. It makes Cleopatra feel less like a strategist and more like a spell. That is exactly what Octavian needs. Remember the problem from earlier. Cleopatra is too complicated to be a clean villain. The snake solves that. It makes her mystical, Eastern, other. It reduces a geopolitical collapse into a moral fable. Don't be tempted. Don't be corrupted. Don't let the East into your house. This is why arguing only about venom symptoms can miss the deeper mechanism. The question isn't, could a cobra kill this way? The question is, why does Rome prefer a story where Cleopatra dies by a symbol of Egypt, rather than a story where she dies by a mundane poison? Poison is ordinary. Poison suggests planning, intelligence, calculation. Poison keeps Cleopatra human, dangerously human, because it implies she outplayed the state's custody. A snake, by contrast, invites myth. It makes her death feel like fate, like ritual, like the final bite of an ancient land. It puts the emphasis on Egypt rather than on Rome's failure to secure her. And there is another advantage. Unreliability becomes a feature. Snakes are unpredictable. That makes the story flexible. It can be told with variations, hidden in a basket, brought in a jar, slipped in with food, without requiring a consistent chain of custody. Myth loves methods that don't demand verification. Myth thrives on plausible mystery. Now, to stay honest, the sources do preserve motifs that help the snake story stick. Plutarch mentions figs. He mentions the quiet, the absence of struggle. He mentions the image of Cleopatra arranged in regal fashion, with her attendants, one dead, one dying, still placing the diadem. That staging fits either poison or bite. It's a theatrical ending either way. And that is the next point. Cleopatra's death is staged. Not staged by Rome, staged by Cleopatra. This is not a woman collapsing in panic. This is a woman choosing what the final image of her will look like. Regal attire, controlled posture, attendants present, a composition. Even if the body is now Octavian's asset, the image of the body is still a battleground. So the method becomes secondary to the message. I will not be led. That is why, in many ways, Octavian's real problem isn't how she dies. It's that she dies in a way that refuses his ritual. If Cleopatra dies privately, she escapes humiliation but becomes a martyr risk. If she dies in a composed tableau, she denies the state the satisfaction of breaking her. She chooses a final picture that says, "You didn't drag me." And yet, here is the bitter truth. Octavian can work with that too, because a mythic death is still a usable death. If he can't parade her living body, he can parade an image, an effigy, a representation, a symbol. He can make the crowd see what he wants them to see, even if the real woman refuses to participate. That's why the snake story is so useful. It's already halfway to an effigy. It's already a symbol glued to an arm. It's already a visual that can be carried through Rome like a banner. So, when modern scripts say, the snake is probably fiction, they may be right or wrong about biology. But they are often accidentally right about politics. The snake is the version history wanted because it serves the logic of empire. A ruler dies by a method that becomes a logo. A complex enemy becomes a simple cautionary tale. A civil war becomes a clean victory over a foreign threat. And now the story is ready for its final pivot. Because once the method is set, ASP, poison, whatever the truth was, the sources converge again on what happens next. A guarded door opens. Silence is broken. And inside, Cleopatra has done the one thing Octavian spent all this time trying to prevent. She has chosen an ending that denies the triumph. But the empire will not accept a denied triumph. So the next question is not, what killed her? The question is, what Octavian does when the body is gone. Yet, the ritual still demands a spectacle. What the sources give us at the end is not a struggle, it's a tableau. That should already unsettle you, because the easiest way to imagine power is as chaos, shouting, violence, guards rushing in too late. But Cleopatra's death, as Plutarch preserves it, is unnervingly controlled. It reads less like panic and more like a final ceremony conducted inside enemy custody. First, the move that makes this possible. She requests to honor Antony. Plutarch reports Cleopatra asked to be taken to Antony's tomb to make offerings. She pours libations. She mourns. She speaks to the dead. And the key detail is not romance, it's access. This is a woman under guard finding a narrow gap in the system. 1 hour, one supervised movement, one moment outside the room where every object has been monitored. Whether she uses that moment to retrieve something hidden, to pass a message, or simply to settle her decision, the sources do not give us an itemized inventory. They don't need to. The shape is clear. Cleopatra is using ritual to open a logistical door. Then she returns, and she writes. Plutarch records that she sends a letter to Octavian, asking to be buried with Antony. That letter is not only a request, it's a distraction and a declaration. A request keeps Octavian in the posture of a ruler who grants favors. A declaration plants a flag in the moral ground. I choose my ending, and I choose my story. Love over triumph, burial over parade. Now the famous delivery, the figs. Plutarch mentions the basket. He mentions that what arrives looks harmless. The beauty of figs as a narrative device is that they are believable. They are ordinary. They look like life continuing. And that is the entire function of the delivery. It is the moment when the prison's routine mistakes normal for safe. Because the guard system is built to stop obvious threats. Blades, poison vials, ropes, anything that looks like a weapon. But the final method, whatever it was, slides in under the cover of the mundane. That is how most real escapes work, not by brute force, but by blending into the expected. The next part is the quiet. Plutarch describes no commotion, no alarm, no crash. The guards hear nothing that sounds like resistance, and that silence is itself a weapon. It denies Octavian the satisfaction of watching her break. It denies the guards the story of we struggled to save her. It leaves them only with the most humiliating outcome for a state, a body they failed to control. When they finally enter, the scene is arranged. Cleopatra is on a couch, often described as golden in later retellings, dressed in royal attire. The details here matter because they are the counter-narrative to captivity. Octavian tried to reduce her to a detainee. Cleopatra answers by presenting herself as a monarch. She cannot stop the conquest. She can stop the costume the conqueror wants to put on her. And then the attendants. Plutarch names them Iris and Charmian. One is dead at Cleopatra's feet. The other is dying, still upright long enough to do something that looks small but is actually the thesis of the whole story. She adjusts the diadem on Cleopatra's head. That gesture is not decoration. It is defiance in miniature. It says, "You can't parade her, so we will crown her ourselves." And then comes the line that has survived because it is too sharp to forget. A guard, confronted with this scene, asks a question that exposes the Roman mindset. Was this well done? Charmian answers, extremely well, fitting for a descendant of so many kings. This is not a lover's ending. This is an argument. It is the defeated asserting dignity, not through victory, but through composition, through control of the final image. Now, step back and look at what Cleopatra has just done to Octavian. She has denied him the cleanest component of triumph, the living captive. She has also denied him a messy martyr narrative. There is no mob, no public execution, no body dragged through the streets of Alexandria that might inspire sympathy or revolt. Instead, she has produced a private scene of royal control that can be interpreted in multiple ways, but cannot be used as a public humiliation. This is why the method, ASP or poison, matters less than the staging. The staging is the message, and the message is simple. You can conquer my kingdom. You can claim my treasury. You can decide the future of my children. But you cannot make me play your role in your ritual. And yet, here is the cruelty that makes this story worth telling. Octavian's victory does not actually depend on her cooperation. He wanted her alive because it was easier. Because a living queen in chains is a cleaner visual than a dead queen in a chamber. But if the body refuses, the empire does what empires do. It substitutes. This is the point where Cleopatra's triumph and defeat collide. She wins the last private battle, the right to choose her ending. But Octavian is about to prove the big question in the most brutal way, that an empire doesn't only conquer land and bodies. It conquers meaning. It conquers memory. And if it can't march the real queen through Rome, it will march something else that looks like her. Which means the next act is inevitable. A door opens in Alexandria, and a procession begins in Rome. Not with Cleopatra, with her image. Cleopatra thought the victory she denied was physical, her living body in chains. But Rome had already evolved past needing the person. Rome needed the picture, a version of her that could be carried, repeated, and believed without argument. Because a triumph is not a celebration, it's a certification. It's the state taking violence and stamping it with moral authority in front of the crowd. The route is a moving courtroom. The spoils are evidence. The banners are testimony. The captive, when there is one, is the verdict made flesh. And when the captive refuses to appear, the state does not cancel the ritual. It replaces the missing ingredient. Cassius Dio preserves the blunt solution. In Octavian's triumph at Rome, an image of Cleopatra was displayed, depicted as dead, with the snake attached to her. A substitute body, a substitute humiliation, a substitute ending that still delivered the story the victor needed. That detail matters because it reveals the real object of the conquest. If a statue can do the job, then the job was never punish the woman. The job was teach the public what the war meant. Octavian had just finished a civil war. The blood was Roman. The enemies were Roman. The dead were Roman. That kind of victory is politically unstable because it reminds everyone that the state can turn on itself. It raises the question that Rome hated most. If you did this to them, what stops you from doing it to me? So Octavian needed an answer that didn't sound like fear. He needed a narrative that felt like restoration. Cleopatra provided it, or rather, her image did. The effigy solves multiple problems at once. It satisfies the triumph's appetite for a conquered enemy. It gives the crowd a foreign face to blame. It turns Antony's defeat from another Roman beat him into he was swallowed by the East. It converts a power struggle into a morality play. Rome purified, Rome rescued, Rome saved from corruption. And notice the cruelty hidden inside that moral play. The crowd becomes complicit. When thousands of spectators cheer an effigy, when they accept the symbol as sufficient, they aren't just watching propaganda, they are participating in it. They are rehearsing obedience. They are learning, in their own throats, how to turn conquest into righteousness. That is why Octavian could afford to lose the real Cleopatra. He could still win the public's mind. And once the mind is secured, the rest becomes administration. Egypt is not treated like a normal prize. Octavian keeps it under tight personal control, governed by an equestrian prefect rather than a senator, with restrictions designed to prevent ambitious Roman nobles from using Egypt's wealth and grain as a rival power base. This isn't just paranoia, it's logistics. Egypt's harvest can feed Rome. Egypt's treasury can pay armies. Egypt's ports can move the empire's lifeblood across the sea. Whoever owns Egypt owns leverage over the city that calls itself the center of the world. So the conquest has two outputs. One output is material, treasure, grain, taxes, stability. Egypt absorbed into the machinery that will soon be called Augustan peace. Veterans need land, soldiers need pay, the capital needs bread, victory needs to be made profitable, or it will look like waste. The other output is symbolic. Cleopatra reduced to a portable warning, snake, seduction, foreign danger, so that Rome can look away from the fact that its greatest threat was never Egypt. It was Rome itself. That's why Cleopatra's death scene, regalia, diadem, well done, doesn't break the machine, it feeds it. The state can say, she chose death because she was guilty, or because she was cowardly, or because she was mystical and Eastern and irrational. The ambiguity is useful. It allows Rome to project whatever moral lesson it wants onto a woman who no longer speaks. And the snake, whether true or not, becomes the perfect hook for that lesson. A symbol that explains everything without explaining anything. And while the crowd watches the effigy, Octavian is doing the real work of power, removing loose ends. Because Cleopatra was never the most dangerous threat in Egypt after Actium, the most dangerous threat was a 17-year-old boy with Caesar's blood and a name that could split loyalty. Caesarion didn't need to win an election. He only needed to exist as a claim, as an alternative story to Octavian's story. A living contradiction to the propaganda that says, "I am Caesar's true heir." This is the final twist in the knife. Cleopatra's refusal to be paraded doesn't stop Octavian from claiming victory. It simply forces him to simplify the spectacle. And the simplification makes the next step easier, because once you've taught the public to accept an image instead of a person, it becomes easier to accept an absence instead of a trial, a disappearance instead of a justification. So the triumph marches on. The crowd sees what it came to see. Rome feels cleansed. And somewhere beyond the applause, Octavian makes the decision that tells you exactly what kind of law this new order will be built on. Not the law that protects the weak, the law that protects the claim. Because the next war is no longer fought with fleets or legions. It's fought against legitimacy itself. And the first target is Cleopatra's son. If Cleopatra was Octavian's propaganda problem, Caesarion was his legitimacy problem. That difference matters. A queen can be turned into a symbol. A son of Julius Caesar can become a rival claim, and claims don't die quietly unless someone makes them. In the ancient accounts, the contours are clear even when the small details blur. Cleopatra had sent Caesarion away from Alexandria when the city fell, an attempt to preserve the last thread of her dynasty and the one piece of political leverage Rome could never fully domesticate, a biological heir to Caesar. Plutarch reports that Caesarion was dispatched toward safety, then intercepted, pulled back by deception or persuasion, and killed on Octavian's orders. The exact road, the exact scene, the exact blade are not preserved like a modern police report. But the logic is preserved perfectly. A living Caesarion was intolerable. Octavian's power rested on adoption, on a legal document, on the claim that Caesar had chosen him. That is strong until a living son exists. Rome's public didn't need to prefer Caesarion. Rome only needed Caesarion to exist as a potential banner for anyone unhappy with Octavian's rise. In a system where loyalty is always conditional, potential is enough. So Caesarion becomes what empires always reduce inconvenient people into, a risk profile. You can see the political arithmetic in the coldest saying preserved by tradition. Too many Caesars is not a good thing. Whether or not those exact words were spoken in that exact form, they capture the policy with brutal accuracy. Remove rival legitimacy before it grows teeth. Octavian doesn't need to defeat Caesarion in open conflict. He only needs to prevent Caesarion from becoming a future conflict. And that tells you something about the philosophy of power operating beneath Rome's marble. Rome liked to say it was governed by law, but in the transition from republic to empire, the law that matters most is not the law of justice. It is the law of succession, the law that decides who gets to stand at the center of the story and call everyone else rebels. Caesarion could have been managed in 100 ways if Rome wanted mercy. Exile, house arrest, a quiet priesthood, a provincial posting with no troops. But mercy toward rival claims is rare, because mercy requires confidence. And Octavian was building a regime that could not afford uncertainty. Not yet. Not while senators still remembered what it felt like to choose sides. Not while generals still had armies loyal to their paymaster. Not while the Republic's corpse was still warm enough to smell. So the boy dies. Not as a dramatic climax. As administration. Meanwhile, the other children become a different kind of asset. Cleopatra's younger children by Antony, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus do not represent a direct claim to Caesar's name. They represent Antony's dynastic fantasy in the East, and that makes them less immediately explosive. So, Rome absorbs them instead of erasing them. They are taken into Octavian's world, raised under Roman supervision, tied to Octavian's household network through Octavia. Their survival becomes another kind of propaganda, proof that Octavian can be merciful, proof that the new ruler is not a butcher, proof that Rome is now stable enough to keep enemies as ornaments. But don't mistake survival for freedom. In empire logic, kept alive often means kept usable. The children become hostages to the narrative, living reminders that the East has been domesticated, that Antony's alternative future has been folded into Rome's. They live not as princes and princesses of Egypt, but as wards of the victor. Bodies placed inside a story they did not choose. And this is where Egypt itself comes into focus. Not as a romantic backdrop, but as the prize that makes the entire operation rational. Egypt is grain. Egypt is revenue. Egypt is ports and shipyards and treasuries that can pay soldiers and feed the capital. After years of civil war, Octavian needs something more than victory. He needs solvency. He needs an economic base that makes his rule feel like order rather than robbery. So Egypt is treated differently from other provinces. It is secured, controlled, and guarded from ambitious Roman elites. Not because Octavian is sentimental about Cleopatra's kingdom, but because he understands leverage. Whoever controls Egypt can starve Rome or save it. Whoever controls Egypt can fund armies. Whoever controls Egypt can threaten the center. That means Cleopatra's fall is not merely the end of a dynasty. It is the conversion of a kingdom into a private power supply for the man who will soon rebrand himself as Augustus. This is how political psychology works at the highest level. You don't just defeat rivals, you build a system where rivals can't afford to exist. Now return to Cleopatra's choice. She chose death to deny Octavian the living humiliation of triumph. And she succeeded, partially. Her body refused the parade. Her will refused the ritual. She forced Octavian to substitute an image, but the empire's deeper machinery was never actually threatened by her refusal, because Octavian's real victory was not over her lungs or her pulse. It was over the structure of meaning. Who gets to be legitimate? Who gets to be foreign? Who gets to be saved? And who gets to be erased with paperwork? Caesarion's death proves that. It says, the story is not safe until the alternative story is dead. And now we are ready for the final resolution, because we've reached the point where every human element has been processed into policy. The queen into an effigy, the son into a liability removed, the younger children into supervised symbols, the kingdom into revenue. Which brings us back to the big question one last time. If Octavian didn't need Cleopatra alive to win the war, and didn't need her dead to win the triumph, then what did he actually conquer in those last days? Her body? Or the reality Rome would remember? Octavian did not conquer Cleopatra the way schoolbooks teach conquest. One battle, one surrender, one death, done. He conquered her the way empires actually conquer, by taking control of what her existence meant and making that meaning portable. That's the answer to the big question. When an empire wins the war but still needs your humiliation, it isn't conquering territory anymore. It's conquering reality by forcing the public to accept its version of events as the only version that counts. Cleopatra understood the mechanics. That's why she barricaded herself inside the monument near Isis with treasure and attendants. That's why she refused to open the doors even when Antony bled out beneath them. She wasn't being cold. She was refusing to become a component in Rome's ritual. She was trying to keep the last private territory a defeated ruler can still own, the threshold between life and death. But Octavian understood something even colder. He understood that her last private territory was not only a personal choice, it was a political resource. A triumph needed a captive. His legitimacy needed a villain. His future needed Egypt's revenue. And his transition from civil war winner to savior of Rome needed a story so simple that a crowd could swallow it in one afternoon. Cleopatra threatened that simplicity, not by having armies, those were gone, by refusing the role, by dying before the parade, by turning her body into a question instead of an exhibit. So, Octavian tried to solve the problem at the level most rulers stop thinking, the level of psychology. He didn't merely surround her, he had her seized by infiltration. He had her disarmed. He assigned custody designed to prevent suicide. He held time itself as a weapon. He constructed the kind of coercion that doesn't need chains visible in public. Make the captive's world so small that hope and fear can be administered like medicine. And then Cleopatra did the one thing he could not force. She chose an ending that denied the spectacle. The sources give us the scene, the calm, the composition, the royal regalia, Iris fallen, Charmian still adjusting the diadem and answering with her last breath that it was done extremely well. That is not a romantic flourish. That is a philosophical claim. You can conquer my world, but you can't make me volunteer my dignity to your ritual. For a moment, that looks like victory. And here is the brutal truth. It is a victory in the smallest possible jurisdiction. Because Octavian doesn't need the real Cleopatra to win the public's mind. He needs only a version of her that can be carried through Rome. Cassius Dio preserves the solution, an effigy. Cleopatra represented with the snake displayed in the triumph. The body disappears. The image marches anyway. That is empire logic in its purest form. When reality won't cooperate, replace reality with a representation, then punish anyone who remembers the difference. Cleopatra's refusal exposes the limit of coercion. Octavian's effigy exposes the limit of refusal. That is why this story isn't ultimately about suicide. It's about substitution. The empire substitutes a civil war with a foreign war in the public memory. It substitutes a complex political opponent with a moral caricature. It substitutes a living captive with an image. It substitutes messy legitimacy with clean ritual. And once that substitution is accepted by the crowd, once the crowd claps for an effigy as if it were the person, the empire has achieved something stronger than victory. It has trained the public to prefer the story that absolves them, because that's the unseen function of the triumph. It doesn't only degrade the captive, it recruits the spectators. It turns a crowd into witnesses who feel purified by watching humiliation. It turns moral doubt into applause. And then it sends everyone home with the same sentence in their mouths. We were right. Now bring Caesarion back into frame, because he's the part that strips the last romance away. If Cleopatra's life was a propaganda object, Caesarion's life was a succession risk. Octavian's regime could not tolerate an alternative Caesar. So, the boy is removed. Quietly, efficiently, administration with blood on the paperwork. And that act tells you exactly what kind of order is being born here. A system where law is not primarily justice. It is control over claims. Control over who is allowed to stand at the center of the narrative and call everyone else illegitimate. This is why Cleopatra's story lasts. Not because she was merely tragic, because she reveals the true endgame of power, not the ability to kill, but the ability to decide what killing means, and to make that meaning outlive the bodies involved. Alexandria itself became a metaphor. The royal quarter sinks underwater over centuries. Earthquakes, subsidence, time, stone halls vanish. The physical stage disappears. And what remains is not the palace, not the chamber, not the monument. What remains is the narrative. Rome's version, repeated until it feels like nature. The snake, the seductress, the foreign corruption, the cautionary tale. So was Cleopatra's final act triumph or tragedy. It was both. It was triumph because she refused to be led. It was tragedy because refusal does not stop an empire from manufacturing an ending that suits it. And that is the last lesson. 1. The sources whisper through gaps and doubt and contradiction. Sometimes the only freedom left is how you lose. Sometimes dignity costs everything and buys nothing, except the knowledge that the choice was yours. And sometimes, even that choice is not enough to stop the victor from owning the story. When the ledger closes, the bones still speak.